Leaders from the Group of 20 meet in Hamburg, Germany. Major issues like trade, security and climate change are all on the agenda, and tensions on the Korean Peninsula are also being addressed. Hello, I'm Arnold Naidu and this is The Heat. The annual G20 summit is underway in Hamburg. Chinese President Xi Jinping, U.S. President Donald Trump, Russian President Vladimir Putin and German Chancellor Angela Merkel are just some of the leaders attending. They are talking about big global challenges, but will they make progress on climate change? What about globalization and trade issues? And the ongoing tension over missile testing by the Democratic People's Republic of Korea is also being discussed. Let's bring in our panel. With me here in Washington is Brian Becker. He's the national coordinator with the Answer Coalition and an analyst on U.S. DPRK relations. Joining us now from Florida is Christopher Hill. He is a former U.S. ambassador and led the U.S. delegation at the six-party talks on the DPRK nuclear issue. With us too from Beijing is Victor Gao. He is a Chinese international relations expert. Joining us from Providence, Rhode Island is Vladimir Golstein. He's an analyst on Russian foreign policy and he's a professor of Slavic Studies at Brown University. Welcome to all of you to the show. Ambassador Hill, let me start with you. This G20 summit in Germany is taking place at a time when there are increasing growing tensions on the Korean Peninsula over the DPRK's missile tests and its nuclear tests. Now, shortly before the Hamburg meeting, President Trump talked about this issue. He issued some very strong words. Let's take a listen to what the president said.
I don't like to talk about what I have planned, but I have some pretty severe things that we're thinking about.
So, Ambassador Hill, how serious is this situation, and could it possibly escalate to a military confrontation?
Well, U.S. presidents have been extremely concerned and frankly engaged on North Korea for decades now. But I would say the situation has kind of reached a new level of seriousness and frankly a very dangerous level, where North Korea has now tested, and this is in the opinion of the experts, tested a intercontinental ballistic missile, and at the same time they're continuing to try to miniaturize their nuclear devices, and for the clear endeavor of trying to threaten the United States with a nuclear-tipped missile. So we have a president who does not like to be threatened. Frankly, no one likes to be threatened. And he made very clear earlier in January, it's not going to happen. Well, the threat is very real, and now the question is, what are we going to do about it? And so the President Trump, is using some of this time at the Hamburg summit to talk to, he will be talking to the Chinese President Xi Jinping, but also he's just had a lengthy discussion with President Vladimir Putin, and he's talking to others about the very need to address the North Korean situation. I will tell you very frankly, the U.S. was not very pleased to see China and Russia come together and come up with a kind of plan which suggests if only we could freeze the North Korean missile tests, somehow we should then freeze our exercises with South Korea. This was not looked upon very well, and it seemed to be, frankly speaking, to be doing what the North Koreans want them to do.
Victor, as you are aware, President Trump has been putting pressure on China. He wants China to do more to resolve these tensions on the Korean Peninsula. And President Trump has also been very critical of China, saying that China has increased trade with the DPRK by 40%. What is China's view of this situation, and how does Beijing see this crisis being resolved?
Well, first of all, the DPRK nuclear weapon program and the missile program are really reaching a very, very dangerous level, and it has the potential of really pushing the situation over the abyss and result in armed conflict with very dire consequences. As far as China is concerned, China for many years has been fully committed to achieve the goal of denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula. China does not want to see nuclear weapons on the Korean Peninsula. China has used all its effort to urge DPRK government to give up the nuclear weapon program. And so far, the effort has not been successful. However, I would say that for many years, the existence and the escalation of the nuclear weapon program of DPRK was to a very large extent due to the division or lack of cooperation among countries involving China and the United States, and to a lesser extent Russia. But now it seems that these major countries, the United States, China, and Russia, are increasingly moving onto the same page. And this means that at a certain point, hopefully sooner rather than later, there will be a point of reckoning. And we will make concerted efforts to make sure that denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula will be achieved and peace and stability will prevail on the Korean Peninsula. On the other hand, from the Chinese perspective, we do not like being pressurized by any country, including by the United States. I think rather than putting pressure on China, the United States probably should create more incentives for China rather than the other way around. I think as far as achieving denuclearization objective on the Korean Peninsula, China and the United States should have common interest rather than divergent interest. And the more common interest we can get at, the sooner we can achieve the ultimate goal of denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula.
Let's go to Vladimir Golstein in Providence, Rhode Island. And Vladimir, what role can Russia play in trying to find a solution to this crisis? Does Russia have any kind of leverage with the DPRK?
Yeah, I think Russia does. First of all, Russia has certain economic and diplomatic ties with North Korea. You know, it has a very small border, but still it's a border. And, you know, they have long history of relationship. So Russia is very much concerned, similar to China, with escalation and nuclearization over the period. So they, you know, use all the channels probably, you know, and they come up with this idea along with, you know, Chinese leadership that things have to be negotiated. And, you know, that the policy of usual threats and intimidations and showing of force and bringing, you know, more, you know, missiles to South Korea, it's not the most productive. So from what I understand, you know, Putin and, you know, Chinese leaders, they came up with this idea of, you know, negotiating, and new South Korean leader is very much attentive to that. They also understand that it's important to sit down at the table and negotiate. So my feeling is, since a lot of countries in this area are seeing eye to eye, it is, you know, important for everyone to sit down at the table and negotiate. United States have sort of, you know, probably, you know, to swallow its pride and stop, you know, issuing orders and decrees and sit down and communicate. What they don't want to achieve is put more and more missiles in South Korea, and that will threaten North Korea, and it will lead to escalation, and, you know, everybody will be threatened, including Russia and China, and it can get out of hand. So that's sort of the Russian attitude, from what I understand.
Brian, you've been to the DPRK several times. When you look at what is going on right now, despite these threats, these warnings, these tests continue, missile development tests, nuclear development tests, what is motivating the DPRK to continue with this?
Well, Ambassador Hill made the point no one wants to be threatened. And guess what? North Korea feels threatened. When the U.S. and South Korea carry out massive war exercises every year that simulate the destruction of their country, simulate the destruction of North Korea. And again, for our audience, let's remember the U.S. bombing of North Korea between 50 and 53 during the Korean War did destroy North Korea. There wasn't one structure taller than one story still standing. And the main complaint of U.S. pilots was that there was nothing left to bomb. So North Korea feels threatened. The United States made a strategic blunder, a major blunder. In the last year of the Clinton administration, there was an effort to come to some sort of agreement with North Korea. Madeleine Albright, the Secretary of State, went to Pyongyang. She met with Kim Jong-il. There was the meeting between the North and the South, what the Koreans called the Historic Summit of June 15th. And then when George W. Bush came in and declared North Korea to be part of the axis of evil along with Iran and Iraq, and then proceeded to prepare for the invasion of Iraq, North Korea said, guess what? We're going to leave the NPT, we're going to drop out of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and we're going to start building nuclear weapons. And then President Obama carried out what's called strategic patience, meaning waiting for the regime to fall. What's happened? They just built more and more and more nuclear weapons. And guess what? Also, there's not going to be the end of nuclear weapons in North Korea. The only reasonable, pragmatic solution right now is for the U.S. to help cap that program, freeze it, in exchange for the beginning of what North Korea wants, which is your question. What do they want? They want normal relations with the United States. They want a peace treaty ending the Korean War. They want to have the end of the war. I mean, it's pretty simple. And if the United States takes those moves, I believe North Korea will reciprocate, but it won't be based on what happened in 2000 when the when DPRK did not have nuclear weapons. It'll be on the basis of DPRK now having nuclear weapons. That was the United States' strategic blunder to think that the regime would fall and it could threaten it. Instead, DPRK has become a fairly significant technological player with nuclear weapons.
Okay, let me get Ambassador Hill's response to that. Ambassador Hill, was there a missed opportunity when Madeleine Albright went to Pyongyang?
Oh, I'm sure there was a missed opportunity there. I'm sure there are a lot of missed opportunities. I'm not a historian, and frankly, this is totally irrelevant. The issue is that North Korea has made very clear that they have no interest in denuclearizing. I know this for a fact because I dealt with them over 4 years in trying to put together an agreement. We had something called the Joint Statement of September 2005. Essentially, I asked the North Koreans, what do you want? They said they want a peace treaty. Terrific. We put in a peace treaty. They said they agreed that they wanted some kind of cross-recognition of states. We put in cross-recognition of states. They said they wanted economic assistance. We put in economic assistance. They said they wanted energy assistance, and we put that in as well. Indeed, what we tried to do was to make sure that North Korea could feel that it was part of a region in the world, Northeast Asia, and in fact, we created a kind of regional mechanism, Northeast Asia Peace and Security mechanism. So the North Koreans said they wanted this, and then we went to the stage of denuclearization because they agreed that they would abandon all their nuclear programs and return to the Non-Proliferation Treaty at an early date. The problem was that they did not acknowledge the need for verification of sites that were not known yet. They only would verify sites that were already fully known. So we were not able to get through that. And then within months, they announced that they were going to pull out, and then several months later, they announced that they had something that they had said all along that they did not have, and that is a highly enriched uranium facility. Since then, I would say the situation has gotten worse. Kim Jong-un, unlike his father, seems completely disinterested in any kind of negotiation. So much so, I think other countries have sort of wondered, what are we going to do? How are we going to manage this? So the approach has been to say to China, look, this is a serious problem. They are developing nuclear weapons, and they are aiming them now at the United States. And no president, including President Trump, can be indifferent to this fact. So we have a serious problem right now.
Victor, let's look at China's role in this. Chinese President Xi Jinping had a meeting with the newly elected President of South Korea, Moon Jae-in, in Berlin just before this G-20 summit in Hamburg. China has been unhappy with the deployment of the THAAD anti-missile system in South Korea. Now, how important is this relationship between Beijing and Seoul in trying to resolve this crisis?
Well, economically speaking, China and Seoul are very important. China and South Korea are very important to each other. And with the cooling down of the political relations between Beijing and Seoul, the economic relations between the two countries also suffer. And therefore, there is an urgent need for both China and South Korea to get their acts together and to normalize their political relations. And the one big sticking point right now is the deployment of the THAAD anti-missile system in South Korea at the urge of the United States. And more recently, it gets worse because there has been test firing of the THAAD missile system already. And I would say the Chinese position is that if the THAAD missile system remains in South Korea, then China will need to take actions appropriately to deal with that situation. And this causes an escalation of the tension as far as the South South Korean situation is concerned, as far as the Korean Peninsula situation is concerned. And all this is not helpful to achieve the ultimate goal of denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula. Therefore, I think from the Chinese perspective, the THAAD missile need to go, and the United States and South Korea need to make sure that they take the appropriate actions which will be suitable and conducive to peaceful discussion and diplomacy leading towards the ultimate goal of denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula.